Hi, I'm Ron Arden, CTO of Fasoo. Welcome to our Fireside Chat on stopping intellectual property theft in manufacturing by encrypting and controlling sensitive data. Let me introduce my guests. Hilary Fair is a senior cybersecurity researcher at GE Gas Power, and Chris Babby is a staff cybersecurity researcher at GE Gas Power.
Welcome, Hilary and Chris, to our chat. And I'd like to start with just having each of you introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about what you do. So let me start with Hilary.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having us. My name's Hilary Fair. I'm part of the data protection team, and I focus on using information rights management, or IRM software, to protect sensitive data throughout the business.
That's great. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So Chris Babby, I am the Insider Threat Program Manager for GE Gas Power. Our whole goal, right, is to protect intellectual property from leaving the environment. So our goal is, to alert on it leaving, but ultimately, how do we prevent it leaving in the future?
Before we get into the conversation, let me set the stage for the challenges that manufacturers like GE are facing protecting their sensitive data. Maintaining a competitive edge in manufacturing demands protecting R&D, product design, specifications, and other sensitive intellectual property. Most of this information is sensitive unstructured data, or data contained in documents like CAD drawings, office files, PDFs, and images. Contrast this with structured data that you find in databases. While this is important to protect, it's not where the challenges are. If you look at a typical person in a business, she creates and interacts with about 50 files a day. These may include copies shared by coworkers or other derivative documents like a PDF. For an organization of 3,000 people, you could see how quickly the numbers grow in a single day. Extrapolate this to a year and you have a lot of files to manage. Security is crucial to stop the leaking of critical information as people share CAD files and other documents throughout the supply chain and to employees or contractors who may not be with your company forever. Insider threats are probably the biggest risk to a manufacturing company. This could be someone with malicious intent who wants to steal your data, but it's more commonly someone who accidentally emails a file to the wrong person or puts a file into the wrong folder in your cloud sharing app. The results of IP loss are a competitive disadvantage that costs you time, money, and your reputation. Securely sharing this data through email, collaboration platforms, and mobile devices throughout your supply chain requires file-centric security to ensure business continuity. It's hard to define the security perimeter anymore, especially with so many people working from home. You may have employees or contractors using company-owned PCs next to personal devices, and data may go between them for convenience. Maybe somebody copies a file from their work PC to a personal computer and prints it. That may be convenient, but you lose all track of that sensitive data. Encrypting and controlling sensitive data at the point of creation reduces insider threat and helps protect your intellectual property. If an employee or contractor changes jobs, you need to immediately revoke their access to sensitive files. Rather than focusing on protecting a location, like a cloud or a file server, it's better to protect the file itself. So having set the stage a little bit, let's get back to our conversation with Hilary and Chris.
I think both of you are uniquely qualified for this conversation, since we really want to focus on how do you protect your intellectual property inside a manufacturing environment. So let me start by asking you a question, Hilary. What are some challenges to protect your IP using solutions that only focus on standard Office documents?
So I think Office files are a good start. We see a lot of sensitive information, whether it's PII or other personal data in documents that HR, finance, legal may use, but specifically for a manufacturing environment, when you start to peel back the layers of the onion, you realize that there's a lot of sensitive data in other file types. We maintain CAD drawings, we have 3D PDFs, and even the source code can contain potentially sensitive information. So it's important that we have a tool that has a wider scope to allow us to protect any format of data that the business may find. I think one of the challenges you have, though, when you focus specifically on Office is there may be compatibility issues. So where a Windows-based application works well on a Windows machine, we have a lot of Mac users. And so that user experience that may occur may be different and may not have the same level of protection or usability that you would find on a traditional Windows-based machine. You also start to have challenges with external sharing. So as a manufacturing business, we share with our suppliers, a lot of third-party vendors, and they may not necessarily use the same tool set as us. And so you lock yourselves into one particular software package when you focus specifically on that. So we want to have the flexibility to have a tool that works with a variety of files and can be used for other software that's out there.
Yeah, so I could see obviously in manufacturing, like you said, you got a lot of CAD drawings and source code that's just, it's not Word, PowerPoint, Excel. You have a lot of intellectual property that's in a lot of other types of file formats. So you need something, as you said, that focuses, with a broader reach, if you will, than just your standard Office documents.
Sure. And a lot of those different file types that I mentioned, they get converted to different formats too. So it's not just one type through the whole workflow, but a supplier may need it in a special format. So you need that flexibility to be able to manipulate your data and provide it in a usable format and still protect it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So Chris, let me get you in a conversation. Given that you're focused on a lot of the insider threat and IP protection in general, what is your biggest concern meeting data protection needs of such a large organization when different divisions can implement their own solutions?
Yeah, it's kind of two parts, so I'll break your question apart. But my biggest concern with just an organization of our size is just the volume of data that we have to protect, right? You're talking about millions of different files. As Hillary said, very complex file types, right? It's not just your standard Office type documents. And just in an organization of our size, just think about like the vast network. So it's not just I have to protect transactions within my walls. It's how many hundreds of suppliers, customers, millions of transactions that are happening every single day. It's how do you just, protect all of those workflows. And the workflows themselves are going to be complex. So, if you think about the engineering space, how many different software packages are used, or just different systems of storage, and how do you make sure your security solutions can scale, at an organization of that size? And the second part of your question of different divisions implementing their own solutions, that's really a non-starter. So in our world, right, we just need to have kind of this unified vision, and we need to be consistent of what tools we're going to use, because just the amount of data that we share, and we're all intertwined, right, in this one ecosystem. If somebody was going to kind of go rogue and build something else, it's going to fall down once data kind of moves over into another part of the business. So we just need to make sure that we partner across all these different functions, all these other businesses, and just have kind of a common vision of the solution we're going to implement.
I would say common guidelines too. I think, the tool set is one thing, but also having similar standards that we all use to set that baseline for our users is important.
So it sounds like you don't want, even though you're separate divisions inside the business, you don't want different divisions to be acting as external partners like your supply chain. They need to be, they're all part of the same company, so you need to be sharing data internally. And I understand, yes, it's important to share with your supply chain, but you need a set of common standards. You're right, because you think about even at the level of a PC, right? If everybody was not using the same application. Like if I was using Word and you were choosing to use something completely different, and the two don't even talk together, all of a sudden we're going to just have obvious incompatibilities. And if you're trying to create unique data protection infrastructures, it's just going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, especially in this climate where there's just major, cost challenges. We just need to make sure that there's compatibility. Like we've done that in the past, and there's just major, like productivity issues, right? And all of a sudden someone's workflow totally breaks down, and we need to make sure that people can deliver the most value, right, during these times. I think everyone's kind of in that, cost conscious setting. So it's really important.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was going to add too is we have a lot of functions that are driven by corporate, right? So corporate not only touches their functional area, but then provides services to all the different businesses. So they need to have the same user experience for each business by having that consistency across the enterprise.
And I could even imagine if you have engineers that just move between divisions, right? And if all of a sudden somebody was working in one environment and now they move to a different division and it's a completely different regime, it's going to be, you're going to have productivity issues, as you said, Chris, and then even just a training issue, right? I mean, the one thing I know about engineers is they get used to a certain tool set and that's what they want to work in. And so you can't have the security infrastructure all of a sudden change on them, like pull the rug out from under them, because they're going to complain and your productivity is going to suffer. I will go back to you, Hillary, on the third question about the productivity stuff. Okay, thanks. That's great. Hillary, let me ask you, given that engineers help the company generate a lot of revenue through their work, as we're talking about, how do you minimize impact to their workflow while protecting your IP?
That's a good question. So I think it starts with educating our end users, getting their buy-in. In order for an engineer who is moving so fast in the business, doing their job, making the business money, you really need them to understand the why. And sometimes it's a matter of creating a shock factor, helping them understand what the impact to the business could be if our sensitive data got outside our walls. And I think once you establish that line in the sand where they get that the impact that their data could potentially have outside the business, then it's a matter of slowly and incrementally working with them to build in data protection to their already existing processes. As Chris mentioned, we don't want to interrupt workflows. We don't want to stop business continuity. So it's important that we kind of slowly get their buy-in and then work with them to identify key pockets of data and implement our solution. And it does have to align with current processes. It can't overlay and cause them to have to change the way they do things. Otherwise, they won't do it. And ultimately, it has to have a strong user experience, because if you have a tool that doesn't work, they're not going to use it.
So when you just said shock factor, and what I'm assuming what you mean is proving to an engineer that if something leaves the business, what the impact is to the business.
Exactly. It could be our competitive edge, the financial impact, reputation, all of those different things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with malicious intent, but I think you need people to think as far as what they're working on and the criticality of it, and if that was to egress outside of the business, what people could do with it. Because not everybody has the good intentions that they may have. So you want to do everything you can to keep all of that data where it needs to be.
Yeah, I think that it's a really interesting point you brought up, which is most of the time it's not malicious. When something leaves the business, it's usually what I call an oops. I accidentally emailed the wrong file to somebody, or I fat fingered, and I was sending I thought I was sending to Hillary, and I wound up sending to Hugh, and Hugh happens to be a competitor that's in my address book. And I think the other thing, as Chris mentioned, with a lot of the issues around work from home, you probably have scenarios where people are, for convenience, just moving things around. Maybe they're moving it to a personal device, which is never good. and accidentally something happens. You know, something gets on a USB stick or whatever the thing is, and all of a sudden, you know, your intellectual property just kind of goes out the door.
Yeah.
Well,
For
and I think,
organizations, go ahead, Hillary.
sorry, I was just going to say in other functional areas too that aren't security experts, you know, you've got financial, you've got legal, you've got sourcing, they interact with data all the time that they send out to our suppliers to get bids. And they're not thinking about what that has happening to that data. And so you really have to educate them on why it's important that they take an extra step or do a certain task in order to preserve that data and make sure that it's maintained.
I was just going to say, Ron, to your point, in this new remote world, like organizations really need to focus on communication and education, because I can confirm on our side, right? It's, you know, people don't know the running rules yet of like the remote world, right? They have all these assets that were never next to their, you know, GE issued endpoint, and now they're there. So there's new risks. They're not malicious. They just need to know what's okay. And I think we would prevent a lot of the activity we would see if we were really just proactive about data sharing, data storage. How should data move in this new world? We would prevent a lot of that. So I'm sure people are already doing it, but definitely, like, I don't see this risk going away. I think this remote arrangement is pretty permanent for a lot of folks. So I think organizations just need to take the proper steps to learn how to protect their data within it.
Yep, and it's our job to educate them what they can and cannot do, because these are new times, and you know, people don't really know what the guidelines and guardrails are that are there.
And I can imagine with everybody being remote that all of a sudden, let's call it new threat vectors are appearing, and they're things you didn't even think about before. Like, okay, somebody is going to copy something to their private OneDrive or their Dropbox account just because it's convenient. It's easy to move stuff around. You know, we used to all copy things to our USB drives, but now it's just as easy to go to a cloud service. And so like you said, it's rules of the road, and what you didn't think was a problem even a year ago, all of a sudden becomes a problem because, like you said, Chris, you've got a company asset next to a private asset. And, you know, when you're just working, you don't really think about that. You're trying to do your job. But if all of a sudden you're moving things in inconvenient or insecure ways, but like you said, if somebody doesn't realize it, you know, they're just working and they're not really worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah, most of it, it's really just a miss on our side. If we just told them the proper running rules, they wouldn't just perform that activity. So we're getting better at it. And just, yeah, all these new things emerging. People just want to back up their data, right? There's no help desk right next to them anymore. So I think people are just doing stuff to protect, you know, they don't want their productivity to dip. That's a perfect example of, I need to make sure my data is safe. Hey, let me move it to my desktop kind of thing. So we need an answer for that now.
And, you know, engineering machines, which typically were in a lab environment in the business, now are in somebody's home. And so it's just a whole nother layer of risk that was never there.
That's true. Yeah.
And now you're getting into, right, we kind of knew like our walls in a manufacturing environment were okay. And now you're worried about, you know, does a virus now get on that machine? Is the home network protected? So now it's not even a data protection issue. It's also more of like a home networking issue. So again, a ton of new risk that has bubbled up that everyone's kind of struggling to answer for.
Yeah. So let's go to, let me ask Chris, let me ask you another question. So what was your experience with other solutions that you use to protect and control sensitive documents?
I think one thing that every solution kind of struggles with in our world is scale. If you just think about, you know, 300,000 folks, how like millions of transactions every single day, all these different mediums for transacting data. We already touched on the complex file types, right? Our value is not driven by the standard stuff. It's more in part files, CAD drawings. I think when you just had like all of that traffic happening for some of these solutions, they struggled a little bit. And then even like kind of the mobile space, right? I think we were finding there are certain populations that really love mobile, right? That's just how they work. They're very busy, they're traveling. And it would work great on the endpoint, and then it would fall down there. And what we're finding is just like we kind of cover all these different complex workflows, and to find a solution that works everywhere is very challenging. Like it worked well when it was like standard workflow, like very cookie cutter. But we don't do cookie cutter at GE. And then just even when, I talked about our vast network, right? I need a solution that works if it gets sent to an organization that has 500,000 people and a supplier that has 3 folks and they're more of like a mom and pop shop. So again, it's just, we just have a whole spectrum, right? We kind of cover everything in terms of file types, network, entity types, and how do you find something that works everywhere? It's a challenge.
It's got to be adaptable, especially with business requirements and environments. We know how quickly those can change. Last year was a big indicator of being able to really pivot and adjust your priorities and approach based on new risks that come up in the business.
Yeah, and I know we touched on user experience, but that's literally everything. I think that's like the main bucket, right? If we're not going to adopt a solution, it just meant the user experience wasn't there. People do not like change. They just don't. We just need to make sure however they are working today, the technology just works. And that's getting, just really hard to find with all these new solutions, cloud storage. It's just critical if we're going to bring anything in-house.
Yeah, I think you both touched on, some very key items. We talked about a few minutes ago, you don't want to change people's workflow. And as you said, we all hate change. If we initiate the change, that's different. But when the change is brought down on us, no, you got a job to do. The person who is creating the next generation of turbine has to do that. They cannot waste their time learning a new tool, completely changing their workflow. And like you said, Chris, if you go out to smaller suppliers that you have, they work the way they work. I mean, you might be able to impose something on them, but still they want to work the way they want to work. Mobile obviously is extremely important today, as you said. And so just working with a flexible solution, and I think that's key, it's adaptability. Because the tool should adapt to you. You shouldn't have to force yourself to adapt to the tool, because that never works. People just get annoyed and they don't use it. Okay, last thing I'd like to wrap up on, I'll start with you, Hillary. What advice would you give to people listening in?
I would say you need to know where your data is. You need to have a strong process for identifying your data, tracking it, understanding the movement, how that data is used. Until you have that, you really don't know where you have sensitive data and how to protect it. And I think once you have a good understanding of what that data movement looks like and where that data is, you can start to build your approach to data protection. It's also important, like we mentioned, to listen to the business, because things are changing all the time. So you need to understand the business processes and be adaptable as they change and the business priorities change. And I think you need to have standards and best practices in place, not only to outline the do's and don'ts for your end users, but also from an auditability perspective, it gives you legs to stand on.
So Chris, let me ask you the same.
Yeah, and I think we touched on it, but it's just really around communication and education. I mean, in the insider threat space, we just wouldn't see, a dominant portion of the activity if we were just upfront on how people are supposed to work and how data is supposed to transact. And then for anyone implementing a solution, I would say like really try to get really close to the business. Like how do you really understand all the different use cases you're going to encounter? Like at least in our world, right? There's all this function overlap. So make sure that if you're going to implement anything, like it cannot be in a silo. Like there needs to be a major partnership with the business. Many different, like everyone has to have a seat at the table. Because I'm sure as you kind of build out that mind map, right, it's going to go all over the place. Just make sure that's understood before kind of going in any direction.
That's a good point, Chris. I think relationship management is a big part of getting their buy-in too, and building out your process, because your data owners are the one that understand your data and can help you to identify the best approach to protecting it.
And just really quick, we didn't really touch on that, but well, kind of, but it's more like just where is your intellectual property? I think a lot of people, like, we're still trying to answer that question, right? It's like, we know it, right? But it's like, do I have, a piece of source code sitting somewhere that's super valuable? And just like doing that inventory, right? Like, I don't think we have that answer yet. I would love to, if I had it, then I'd be good to go. But I think it's just like some of these 101 things of just assets, inventory, like basic things to really know your environment, really gives you a head start, especially at our scale. It can be very challenging, as you can imagine.
Well, in a 100-year-old business, I mean, you've got data that dates back, from the beginning.
70s, yeah, all the data retention requirements. We have that stuff that's around forever.
Yeah. And you have churn of employees and contractors. And so people who may have known where the data was years ago are no longer with the company. So again, that's really where you need to partner with the business and the functional areas to get to the heart of where things are and what they do with it.
I can also imagine, what you've been saying is that you need a solution that is location agnostic, because you have a lot of systems. Some would be legacy, some might be brand new. Things are in the cloud, the things on people's phones. And as you mentioned, when we've got home devices and engineering workstations that never left, the factory floor before. So you can't rely anymore on a perimeter, whatever that means today. People used to say, okay, well, when I'm inside the company, I've got a perimeter. Well, the perimeter there's no perimeter anymore. It's kind of everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so, as you're talking, I was thinking about that. So once you identify the data, as you said, you need to protect it, and the best methods are encryption and controlling access to it this way. I don't really care where it goes. If it's on the phone or if it's on a contractor who leaves, I still have that ultimate control over it, because if you're using a location-based approach, that's never going to work. Like you said, in your scale, this stuff could be anywhere. In fact, I'm guessing you have things that you probably even have storage assets that you don't even know about, because somebody put a server somewhere in a room and, and nobody remembers what's there. And then all of a sudden you find out something of value is sitting on that device.
Mm-hmm. Or an endpoint in their bottom drawer of their desk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can confirm that our data is everywhere. So again, the data-centric model of protection, just risk really goes away. It really does. I think like most organizations need to shift towards that model, to your point, right? There's zero perimeter today. Our data is all over the world in every system imaginable. And how do we make sure it's protected wherever it goes?
Yeah, and I can imagine, I know we have some other, we have some customers of ours who have scenarios where they have to feed the data to machines. And so those systems tend to be older just because of the cost of those types of machines. So you might even have a Windows XP machine that's connected to one of these devices, and there's some important process information on it. And again, nobody really thinks about it because it's not, it's not a desktop, it's not a server, it's not in your data center, but again, it's sensitive information. And as you mentioned, if you got a contractor or a person who just ups and leaves the business and says, hey, this might be really cool for me to take to my next company, you're never going to know that. And all of a sudden, something very important walks out the door.
Scary.
Very scary. All right. Well, I want to thank the two of you. Really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us, and have a great day.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.